I'm sorry, we did not get your name. After you state your name, please press the pound key. I'm sorry, we did not get your name. After you state your name, please press the pound key.
He maybe went for coffee.
So, Darren, I'm going to hand you over your, how do I get this idea? You should be able to. Yeah. I have the next arrows now. Oh, duh. Oh, there's another button. I can hear us. There's a delay. So I'm going to mute my speaker. Yeah, CBA. We'll get double audio. Okay, all right. Okay, so, and you want to do the question?
Um,
9 more minutes.
well, here, should I put us on? Hi, Jason. Can you hear us now?
Maybe, but we can't hear him.
Well, we have it open, so we should be able to hear him. What's your stop audio do up there?
Actually, stop it.
It stops what we're talking right now. It's recording. Hello?
Hello?
I'm going to chat to everybody, okay? To all?
Testing. Can everybody hear us out there?
Yes?
There we go.
Fantastic. Is Jason here? No?
Plug it in. Oh, it's Jason.
I don't know. I have never met him.
Oh, that's okay. You do the same thing to me, so.
Oh, what?
Put your computer back in the box.
Really? You want to ask him if he's there? Want to ask him if he's there?
Jason Urquhart, are you there?
Hi, guys.
Okay, so you can hear us now.
No, I dialed in through the phone.
Oh, you dialed in through the phone line. Okay.
Yeah, still nothing through the computer.
And you have your speakers turned on, right?
Oh, yeah, they're cranked.
Okay. All right.
You want to tell everyone to.
Tell everybody to phone in. All right. No. Mike Moore can't hear us.
Mike, you can't hear us there?
And they have speakers.
And the speakers are not working.
It's weird.
So phone in.
Is this meeting going to be for free dial, anybody? Is this meeting going to be?
Now. Hello? Is anybody else on the call?
I'm here.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hey, this is Bob Deeks.
Hey, this is Don Jansen.
How do I add that?
Hi,
Hi.
it's Terry Sharp here from CHBA. We're just waiting for a few people to join in, and then we'll be getting started.
All right.
Hi, Gary. It's Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Can I suggest you put up a slide to point users to call in rather than try and get audio on the web? I know you put it on the chat, but that chat screen isn't readily obvious to people.
Okay.
Do you want to take control back? How am I supposed to put something like?
Oh, just write in the Word document or whatever, another slide.
And
pull
then
it up.
and then
Pull it up.
upload it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're just going to upload. Show your screen, or show your desktop.
How do you do that? Well, I have to give it back to you. You have to take it back.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
I'm calling. It's Corinne Black from Prestige Homes. I'm not getting any.
You're not getting any audio over your computer, right?
No.
Okay. We'll see.
Is there any way to increase the volume on this?
Probably.
That's the maximum? Oh, it needs to be on.
Hello? Hello?
It should be louder though.
Okay, we'll be starting in a couple of minutes here.
I can't have it now.
The conference is in lecture mode.
Okay, folks. The speakers on your computer should now be working.
The conference is no longer in lecture mode. The conference is in lecture mode.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've put the conference into lecture mode, so we can't hear the people that are out there. So if you want to communicate with us, you'll need to use the chat feature on your computer through the screen. We've resolved the problem, we believe, with the computer speakers. The computer speakers should now be working.
Yes, they have a phone.
Great. Okay.
Okay, well, I think we'll get started then. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar on the proposed revisions to Part 9 of the National Building Code, which is being hosted by the Canadian Home Builders Association. I'm Don Johnston, and I'm CHBA's Director of Technology and Policy. I'm here in Ottawa with Gary Sharp, CHBA's new Director of Technical Services, Mihailo Mihailovic from the Canadian Code Centre at NRC. Also with us today is Adair Chown, who many of you know as the Director of Technology for the Canadian Manufactured Housing Institute. But today she is wearing her hat as a special consultant to CHBA on codes. Adair will be leading us through the subject matter on today's call. Next slide, please. There are quite a few of you on the call today, too many to have an open forum. All lines are mute, but I encourage you to use the chat function to send in questions, which we will respond to after Adair's presentation, which will take about an hour, and we will post the questions and the material on CHBA's website after the call. Many of you are familiar with the National Codes development process, making a long introduction unnecessary. Background, please. The current edition of the National Building Code was published in 2010, and there was a major amendment in 2012 when energy efficiency requirements were added for the first time. These changes were the focus of the last seminar hosted by CHBA 1 year ago. Provinces are in various stages of modifying their building codes to reflect the 2010 National Building Code, but the majority have not yet done so. In the meantime, the development of the next edition of the NBC rolls on. The set of proposed changes currently out for public review and the subject of today's call would be combined with another set of changes next year at this time for inclusion in the 2015 National Building Code. It will be a few years after that we will see them reflected in provincial building codes. Now, just a few words about where these changes came from and who decided that they were necessary. The Code Center, the code change requests come into the Code Center in a steady stream from code users, including builders and suppliers and public health advocates and regulators. CHB itself submitted a number of changes for this round. These are screened and dealt with by committees of volunteers who come from industry and regulatory community and elsewhere. Builders are involved at every level of the process here, at the level of the Canadian Commission on Building and Fire Codes, and at the level of the Standing Committee on Housing and Small Buildings, including the chair of that committee, Tom Cochran, who is a builder from Hamilton and a former president of CHBA. There are 6 builders altogether on the Housing and Small Buildings Committee. In addition, we at CHBA have an ex officio position on that committee as well. The purpose of today's webinar is to uncover potential problems with the proposed changes. Our goal is to inform you about the changes and how to respond to the public review with comments of support or perhaps comments against where appropriate. As Adair will explain, the committee doesn't care whether or not you like a change. What they want to know is why. Did they not think of something important? Did they miss seeing a problem that the change would cause? I'll now ask Adair to lead us through the most important code changes. Adair was NRC's Senior Technical Advisor for Part 9 for the 2005 National Building Code. She is very knowledgeable about codes and many other things as well. She spearheaded our industry's efforts to sort out proposed changes to step dimensions, which will affect next year's batch of changes. She represents the Canadian Manufactured Housing Institute on CHBA's Technical Research Committee. Adair, over to you.
Thank you very much, Don, and welcome everybody. My presentation is going to have 4 parts to it today. I'm going to start with just a quick description of how to find the proposed change forms, PCFs. I'll provide a quick introduction to the proposed changes, sort of an overall view, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of certain proposals that we see as presenting issues for builders. In some cases negative, and in some cases they're okay, and we think that a positive comment might be appropriate. And then I'll finish up by showing you how you can submit your comments online. So to start with, finding the proposed change forms. We start at the National Codes website. That's www.nationalcodes.nrc.gc.ca. And if you look on the top of the page on the right-hand side, you'll find a link to the Fall 2003 Public Review. Click on the link, and you come to a page that at the top provides some general background information, and then a little bit further down identifies 5 steps for submitting comments on the proposed changes. Step 1 is read the guidelines, which we encourage you to do. Step 2, read the instructions for submitting comments, also a very good idea. Step 3, look at the proposed changes. Step 4, complete the online comment form. And step 5, you can actually see what happens to your comments. So we're going to assume that you've read the guidelines and the instructions, and we'll go direct to viewing the proposed changes. Click on this link, and the top of this page again has some general information. And then a little bit further down on the left-hand side, you can see View Technical Changes. And there are 3 options. You can look at them by code section, by subject, or you can actually download PDFs of the complete collections of proposed changes by building code. Now, I find it's kind of useful to download these things for future reference, just so you have them, and it's sometimes easier to actually find proposed changes this way. But in terms of doing a review, it's best, I think, if you view the changes by subject. So we're going to be focusing on National Building Code. We click on the NBC link, and we see all the subject headings for the proposed changes to the National Building Code, from accessibility all the way down to wind uplift resistance of roofing. Under each of these headings, you'll see a drop-down menu, and if you click on that, you'll see all of the code references that are addressed by the proposed changes for that subject, and links to the proposed change forms themselves. So, for example, here under airborne sound transmission, we have a proposed change to Division A, undefined terms. Then there's a change to Part 3, which is just a link to cross-reference to Part 5. Changes to Part 5 to introduce the new requirements for sound transmission. And then you'll see 4 code references for Part 9 requirements. But if you look at these closely, you'll see that 2 of them have the same proposed change form number. So, in fact, there are only 3 proposed change forms here, but they address 4 code references. So this little detail comes up every once in a while. So if you think you're seeing double, it's just a result of the automatic electronic publication of the changes. Most of what we're going to be looking at today are Part 9, but I'm also going to say a few things about combustible construction, which has changes for Part 3, 4, 5, and the National Fire Code. If we click on a proposed change link, this brings up the proposed change form itself, and I'll just run through this quickly just to show you what these things look like in case you haven't seen them before. They're more or less formatted the same. At the top is the proposed change number, then the National Building Code reference, and a title, a subject, and then a very short description of what the change is all about. Below that heading information is the existing provision, usually. Every once in a while, this jumps directly to the proposed change itself. In some cases, you'll also see a section titled Previously Approved Proposed Change. And this comes where a proposed change has been approved through a public review earlier this cycle, but it hasn't been published in the code yet. So we're sort of building changes on top of changes. So next, the change form will show the proposed change itself. They're presented in standard markup format, red crossouts, green underlines for new material. You'll notice also that if there's a change to a related appendix note, that appendix note is provided on the same proposed change form as the referencing provision. You'll also notice that there are 2 sets of numbers for everything. At the top on this form, you'll see 926.1 in black, and that's the existing code reference. And the numbers on the left in green and square brackets are the numbers that will apply to each of the provisions if the change is approved. So these would be the 2015 provision numbers. So where a provision is brand new, you'll only see the numbers in square brackets. Following the change itself is the rationale, identification of the problem, a justification or explanation of the solution that's being proposed, some information on cost and enforcement implications, and then an identification of who would be affected by the change. And then at the very bottom of the proposed change form is the objective-based analysis. So if you're a real glutton for punishment, you can check and see what the new requirements are attributed to in terms of functional statements and objectives. Introduction to the proposed changes, just a quick overview here. This list is a listing of all the subjects of proposed changes to Part 9. You don't need to memorize this. We will be posting the presentation so you can look at all this later. And we're not going to look at all of those changes today. In terms of commenting on the changes, there are 5 options: support, support with comments, support with modifications, do not support, and no opinion. Now, as far as the standing committee is concerned, the first and last options aren't particularly helpful to them. It doesn't change anything in their discussion. So if you're going to provide comments, I'd suggest that you select from one of the remaining 3. So for the Part 9 proposed changes and related changes to Division A on definitions, we're suggesting that 41 of the proposals be accepted, 5 support with comments, 11 support with modifications, and 1 do not support. So these are the subjects that we'll be looking at today: airborne sound transmission, exterior insulating finish systems, soft conversion, protection near cooktops and ovens, smoke tightness of closures, stairs, ramps, handrails, and guards, a few of those, and then a final one on dryer venting. I'm also going to mention one Part 3 change because it's referenced by Part 9. Specifically, Part 9 references an appendix note that's part of this change. And then finally, on combustible construction, there are 41 proposed changes on this subject. As I mentioned, provided in Parts 3, 4, and 5 of the National Building Code and also in the National Fire Code. And we're really only concerned with 2 of those, so we'll just have a look at those. So now into the nitty-gritty, or just about. I just want to take a minute and mention how the slides are formatted, just to help understand what's being presented. The text at the very top of the slide is the subject of the proposed change, and it should be the same words as the subject that you find on the code's website. Underneath that is a code reference, and again, it should be the same as what's on the website to identify the code reference for change. Then the proposed change form number and subject, again, mirroring what's on the website. And then under that, I will identify the issue that's addressed by the proposed change form and the solution that's being proposed. I'll provide a little outline of what's in the change, identify the problems with it, in some cases suggest a revision, and then at the bottom of every slide is a link to that specific proposed change, so you can find those if you want to go direct to a particular change form. So the first subject is airborne sound transmission. And the problem that's addressed by the proposed change is that the current requirements that specify minimum sound transmission class don't address flanking sound. And trying to improve performance simply by increasing STC can be very expensive and often doesn't work very well. So the solution is to specify a minimum ASTC, which is apparent sound transmission class, and to also provide some deemed to comply prescriptive solutions. So what the change does is it specifies required minimum protection to address flanking. In the general case, that's a minimum ASTC of 47 decibels, or a minimum STC of 50, which is in the code right now, plus some prescriptive construction criteria. For dwellings and houses with secondary suites, the criteria are a little less stringent. The proposed change specifies how ASTC is to be determined. The options are testing, or what is called measurement, I think, in the proposed change, or calculation, which is essentially a reference to Part 5. And the change states how to demonstrate compliance with an ASTC rating, which again can be through testing or calculation, or by constructing assemblies according to some prescriptive requirements that describe the treatment of flanking assemblies depending on what your separating assembly is. So for example, if you have side-by-side dwelling units, your wall is your separating assembly, and if that assembly is a double stud wall and the subfloor is not continuous under that wall, then you don't have to do anything else. On the other hand, if you have a single stud wall and your subfloor is continuous under that wall, then you'll be required to add topping on the subfloor in order to comply with the ASTC requirement. The proposed change also includes updates to the appendix note to provide more information on flanking and on deemed to comply assemblies. So, what's wrong with the thing? Well, not a whole lot, actually. There was an awful lot of work that went into developing these changes, and considerable attention paid to comments from builders on the committee. The real difficulty is essentially editorial, but there are technical implications. There are two issues with this one. The first is that in the requirements that provide the prescriptive construction information, the subclause refers to the topping and finished flooring complying with a certain table. And when you look at the table, actually in some cases they require topping, in some cases they require specific finished flooring, in some cases there is no additional requirement for either. So it just needs to be clearer that it's topping and or neither. So it's just really an editorial thing, but it can be confusing if it's not clear that it's one or the other or none. The second is in the table itself that describes what needs to be done to the adjoining assemblies when your separating walls are W13, 14, or 15. Those are the numbers in the current fire and sound resistance tables, and those walls are double stud walls. The table provides instructions on what to do if your subfloor is continuous under the wall, but it doesn't say what to do if there's no continuous subfloor. So it raises the question of, well, do you have to do nothing, or is this not even permitted? So that just needs to be clarified. Makes a big difference. The next issue I'd like to look at is exterior insulation and finish systems. At the moment, EIFS is not recognized in Part 9, so the solution that's proposed is to provide some requirements. The proposal would accept EIFS as cladding on wood frame masonry, steel stud, and cast-in-place concrete walls, and it requires compliance with a number of other subsections in the code or Part 5. There's a provision under 927.2.2 on minimum protection that indicates that if you install EIFS according to a new subsection 927.13, that installation is deemed to provide a capillary break. And if we look at 927.13, the proposed change indicates that EIFS can be used under Part 9, provided it complies with the ULC standard, and also provided there's a drainage cavity. And then it specifies a number of standards that must be followed for materials, design, and installation. So, concerns with this has to do with the performance of that drainage cavity. The provision says that the cavity has to be a minimum depth of 6 millimeters with an open area of not less than 13% of the full area of the EIFS panel. Now, the reason we're concerned about this is that if we compare this with all the other drainage cavity requirements for other types of assemblies, the criteria are quite a bit more stringent. So rather than 6 millimeter cavity depth, all the other ones are at least 10 millimeters. And for a simple drain and vented airspace, the code currently requires that be over the full area of the wall. If it's drainage material, we require a minimum 80% open. So would like to be reassured that this 6 millimeters over 13% is actually going to provide adequate performance, especially in cases of warmer, wet climates, such as coastal British Columbia. if we go back and look at the IRC Industry Consortium report on moisture in envelope systems, then there are some concerns raised there about performance of EAFs in warm, wet climates. So we just need a little reassurance there that we're going to have minimum acceptable performance. Another leaky condo issue we don't need. The next subject is under this really informative heading of Other. There are quite a few proposed changes under that heading. One of them is soft conversion. Every once in a while, the Code Center gets an inquiry from someone saying, I install my studs at 16 inches on center, and that's further apart than what the code says. Because the code's in SI, and it's done a soft conversion of 16 inches to 600 millimeters, and 16 inches is really 610 millimeters. So the solution that's being proposed is to add an appendix note to identify deemed to comply imperial dimensions. So this appendix note would be referenced from 3 different provisions in Part 9, and it currently addresses dimensions that are acceptable where these are hard conversions from imperial measures, but it only addresses spacing between framing elements, like studs. So the concern we have with this is that we actually have 2 concerns, sorry. The first is administrative. The fact that the information is provided in the appendix note means it's not enforceable. So it's useful information, but it has no legal standing when it's in the appendix. The second is a question of scope. The proposed change addresses spacing of framing, but it's not clear if that includes strapping and furring. And it doesn't address other things such as the spacing of elements that depend on the spacing of framing, such as ties for masonry veneer, or dimensions that depend on traditional component dimensions, for example, concrete block, which has implications for foundation thickness and also for spacing or reinforcing. The proposed change has a little conversion table in it to identify hard conversions that would be acceptable, but the table only goes up to 24 inches. And with a quick review of Part 9, I've identified values up to 72 that I think the change should address. Next issue is protection near cooktops and ovens. This issue arose as a result of problems with interpretation in the application of the existing requirement. And just to give you a little background on that, this illustration shows standard kitchen cabinet setup. I've actually shown 2 kitchens back to back against a common wall just so that my illustration doesn't get too cluttered up. So we've got standard 3-foot high lower units, 29.5 inches clear to unprotected cabinets. Of course, we generally protect the cabinets with a hood, and then we can bring the cabinets down to 24 inches. A certain authority was imposing the unprotected cabinet height on microwave ovens that are installed over cooktops, which meant that these were installed almost 5.5 feet above the floor. Obviously not very practical and actually rather dangerous. So the solution is to clarify the application of the requirement in an appendix note. So the note, as written, clarifies that clearances that are specified in 9.10.22.2 only apply to combustible framing, finishes, and cabinetry. They don't apply to microwave ovens installed over cooktops. And the appendix note explains that these microwave ovens should only be installed according to the manufacturer's instructions, and if the instructions include installation over a cooktop, then the oven will have been tested accordingly. So we don't need any special requirements for this, just follow the manufacturer's instructions. And we would suggest supporting this proposed change because it really does clarify some problems that some builders have been running into. Next subject is smoke tightness of closures. Right now, the code requires fire dampers in ducts and air transfer openings that run through fire separations. That's all very well and good, but actually smoke is a bigger problem than fire. So the solution that's proposed is to require smoke dampers in air transfer openings. So there's a revision to Part 9 that references Part 3 for fire dampers. At the moment, those requirements are in Part 9. We're just taking them out of Part 9 and just referring to the requirements in Part 3. There's no technical change there. Secondly, the proposed change references Part 3 for smoke dampers in air transfer openings through fire separations. That's the new piece. And it also provides an appendix note to make clear that smoke dampers are not required in ducts in Part 9 buildings. They are required in Part 3, so you just want to make sure that people are clear that the dampers in ducts are not required in Part 9. Issue here is really a question to you, and we're hoping that you might be able to help us out here as to whether there's any real issue here or not. I don't know whether air transfer openings are even used anymore. And if they are, does the code need a definition for these so that we know what we're talking about and what the requirement actually applies to? Stairs, ramps, handrails, and guards. There are quite a few changes here, and quite a few of them we have suggested comments on. First one is a defined term for flight. There are a number of requirements that refer to the length of stair flights, so we need to be clear on what is meant by the word flight. So the solution is to provide a definition. And the proposed change actually provides not just a definition, but also an appendix note with an illustration. So this is great, except we still don't really know what a flight is because the illustration doesn't show any nosings on the treads. And so if you have nosings, does the flight include the nosing on the top at the landing? Does it include it on the bottom tread? It's not at all clear. So you don't really know where the flight starts and ends, so you don't know, for example, where a handrail has to start and end. So we're raising that issue in the comments. Next, I'm going to talk about two proposed change forms at the same time because the difficulties with them are the same. The proposed changes are meant to address consistency in terminology, identify where the depth of a tread is to be measured, and one of them is addressing the subject of deeper angled treads at the base of a mixed run stair, which is not currently allowed. So solution, proposed change would make the terminology consistent, specify the dimension of the treads at the walking line on the inside of the curve, and allow deeper angled treads at the base of the stair. So for this first change, flights with mixed treads within dwelling units would require uniformity of tapered and regular treads in a mixed run to be measured 300 millimeters from the center of the inside handrail. And for tapered treads at the bottom, it simply allows the tread of the tapered tread to exceed the run of the rectangular treads. For the second proposed change form, 9844, the change would specify a run at the narrow end of the tread, again, specify minimum run, measured 300 millimeters from the center of the handrail at narrow end of the tread, requires consistent angle, and it talks about measurement of tolerances. So the difficulty here is really where to measure. The changes specify 300 millimeters from the center of the handrail, but they refer to handrails on the inside of stairs that are curved and have mixed runs. The problem is that there is no requirement right now to have a handrail on the inside of the curve, so they're assuming that a proposed change to do that will be accepted, and we have some difficulties with that change. The other thing is that there's an exception for winders. So if you have a flight with winders in it, you're allowed to have the handrail on the outside, so there may be no handrail on the inside from which to measure. So the suggestion is that the two proposed changes be reworded so that the tread is measured from the handrail where there is a handrail and measured from the end of the tread where there isn't a handrail. And there's quite a bit of duplication in the requirements, so where that duplication appears, we're suggesting you just refer to the previous sentence instead of restating things all over again. You may notice on the way by that there's also a proposed change for 9843 dimensions of tapered treads in public stairs that reads the same as the change we just looked at. But in this case, there's no problem because for public stairs that are curved, you have to have handrails on both sides anyway, so there will be a handrail to measure from. Step dimensions, spiral stairs. As you all know, at the moment, the code doesn't allow spiral stairs, so there is a proposal to provide requirements for spiral stairs, and the proposed change specifies location and minimum height of handrails, clear width of the stair, step dimensions, consistent tread size and angle, limits on use. You're only allowed to use these in a means of egress when that means of egress will not serve more than 3 persons. So if you've got a spiral stair going up to a bedroom, that's only 1 bedroom because the code assumes 2 people per bedroom, and you're not allowed to install them in exits. And the proposed change also provides an appendix note to describe spiral stairs. Problem with this, first problem is a matter of consistency. The task group that developed the proposed changes was quite adamant that the measurement of tread depth should be at the walking line, but for some reason when you got to spiral stairs, they're measuring at the narrow edge. So if it's so important to measure at the walking line, I think that they should probably do that for spiral stairs as well. The second problem is that the appendix note describes a typical structure of a spiral stair rather than the properties that affect safety and use, which of course is what the code is really concerned about. So the appendix note at the moment, as proposed, says that the spiral stair is a stair with a circular plan having uniform treads that radiate from and wind around a central post or supporting column. And obviously you could have a curved stair that's structurally built the same way, or you could have a spiral stair that meets all the requirements in the body of the code that doesn't have a central column. So that structural piece of information isn't particularly helpful. So I think if they're going to have an appendix note to describe what these are about, they really should be talking about the code criteria rather than the structure. Dimensions of landings. At the moment, there's a table in Part 9 that provides a number of different criteria for different landing configurations, and the solution is to provide just one simple rule. That's great, simplifies the requirements, and the proposed change also expands on an appendix note to make things even clearer. The issue here is one of, it's none of these cases where it looks like an editorial issue, but it really does have an impact on how one interprets the requirement and applies it, so it becomes technical. One of the sentences at the moment in the proposed change refers to a straight run where the stairway or ramp turns less than 90 degrees. I'm not altogether clear whether the flight is straight and the landing turns less than 90, or whether the flight might be curved or straight and the landing is straight or turns 90 degrees. I think what they're trying to say is that where you have a landing on a stair or ramp, where the landing does not turn or turns less than 90 degrees, then you do something. So that's just a clarification so that we're really sure about what the requirement's applying to. Handrail reachability. This is the issue of intermediate handrails for wider stairs. At the moment in Part 9, you're required to add an intermediate handrail where a stair or ramp is required to be 2.2 meters wide or more. Fact of the matter is that rarely, if ever, happens, so the requirement really doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't mean anything. So the solution is to specify the location of the handrail relative to the path of travel. So the proposed change would require a handrail within 750 millimeters of the direct path of travel, but it doesn't apply to stairs serving 1 or 2 dwelling units. And this is the provision that references that appendix note in Part 3. Again, kind of an editorial issue, but major technical implications. This becomes very confusing very quickly. The way the requirements are written, the sentence 2 on the path of travel is an exception to sentence 1, which is a sentence that specifies the number of handrails that are required. So it suggests that you're allowed to put a handrail not more than 750 millimeters from the path of travel instead of handrails at the sides of the stair or ramp. I don't think that's quite what they meant to do. And if it's okay to have a handrail down the middle of a stair or not on the edge, which may be quite reasonable for an exterior stair, then why can't you do that for stairs serving single dwelling units? The second difficulty is this term direct path of travel. There'll be cases where the most direct path of travel might actually be diagonally up a stair. Obviously, that's not what they meant. If you imagine a curved stair, a direct path of travel might take you from one side of the stair to the other and back again. So I think there's a little problem with the wording. The appendix note in Part 3 refers to the natural path of travel, which is probably a better description of what they're trying to get at. If we look at the Part 3 requirement, and keeping in mind that the committees tried to eliminate differences between Part 3 and Part 9, the requirement starts by specifying that you have to have handrails on 2 sides. Remember, this is public stairs from Part 3. Sentence 3 would require additional handrails, so this is in addition, not instead of, as the Part 9 requirement reads. Their sentence 4 would require the handrails, again, along the direct path of travel. That term's problematic. But when you look at the appendix note, as I mentioned, it refers to natural path of travel, and it also suggests that the handrails are only required on the natural path as opposed to in addition, and it refers to stairs to and from the building, which makes one wonder if this is really only supposed to apply to exterior stairs, but that's not what the requirements say. So this is all very confusing, and just to make matters worse, the appendix note in the title refers to monumental stairs, and that's not a defined term, so I'm not clear what they're really referring to. Are they really monumental, or are they just stairs that are wider than the minimum required? So in terms of suggested revisions, I think we need to get rid of that term monumental in the appendix note. If the requirement to install these handrails along the natural path of travel are only supposed to be exterior, that should be made clear. Otherwise, this reference to and from the building should be deleted. One might note that for interior stairs, you'd expect the natural path of travel to be toward the side of the stair, and so you can measure your exit width from the side. And where you're talking about exterior stairs, you might have handrails just down the middle somewhere, and you may not need handrails on the sides. Again, the requirements are not clear, and they need to be made clear. And a final observation is that by installing a handrail somewhere within the stair, you're actually defining a path of travel. So a whole number of issues here that I think warrant some further thought. This next proposed change is the one that caused problems in terms of measurement of your tread depth relative to the handrail. This is the change that would require the handrail to be installed on the inside of curved stairs and stairs with mixed treads. And it also provides, as I mentioned, an exception for winders, so you could have the handrail on the outside of the stair. So we would support the exception for to allow the handrail to be on the outside for winders. You can put the handrail anywhere you want, as far as we're concerned. But there are problems with the justification and the costing on this proposed change. The justification only refers to consistency of tread depth at the walking line. Now, for a curved stair, the tread depth at the outside of the stair is going to be consistent, just the same as it should be consistent anywhere. So the rationale for requiring the handrail to be on the inside just doesn't apply. For costing, the proposed change doesn't identify any cost implications, but you can imagine that if you have a case where you have a wall on the inside of the curved stair and a garden handrail on the outside, on the wide side, this change will actually require you to add a handrail on the inside. So there will be cost implications, and those should be recognized. Continuity of handrails. The requirements at the moment allow breaks in handrails at doorways, obviously on landings. Although I was in a building recently where there was a doorway on a winder tread, so you never know. Breaks at newels, at changes in direction, and for dwelling units and houses with secondary suites, you are also allowed to break your handrails at the landings. So there was some concern that these handrails are not continuous enough. So the proposed change would require greater continuity for the length of ramps and flights, and also for the full length of the stair, except for single dwelling units and houses with secondary suites. And for houses and single dwelling units and houses with secondary suites, there's also a provision that would allow the handrail to start back from the end of the stair to allow for volutes. And the appendix note would be updated accordingly. Problems with this, for stairs other than single dwelling units or houses with secondary suites, we've identified problems with the application of the requirements, the justification, the costing, and also the attributed objectives. For the application, as written, the change would require continuity at landings where there's a change in direction, but not for landings that don't turn, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. If you want continuity, you should have continuity. In the justification, we find that the current wording of the requirement is actually consistent with the intent statement, which is to limit the probability of unexpected continuity. And I would expect newel posts at certain places on stairs. So if we're going to change the requirement, we also need to change the intent, and that hasn't been done. On costing, again, it's this issue, the costing, changes in cost have not been recognized, and again, we have a situation that the requirement would require an additional handrail where there's a wall on the inside of the stair and a guard on the outside. And objectives. This proposed change, there's a new attribution to the barrier-free objective and the functional statement that relates to access and circulation in the building. Now, both the objective and the functional statement have references to other provisions for limitations on the application. And if we look at those, we find that this objective and the functional statements do not apply to detached houses, semi-detached houses, houses with secondary suites, duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, row houses, and boarding houses. So to all of a sudden apply these objectives and functional statements to cases other than single dwelling units and houses with secondary suites creates an inherent contradiction within the code. So that is really problematic. You might also recall that there's a provision in Section 9.5 that says that if your building doesn't have an elevator, then you don't have to provide a barrier-free path of travel anywhere except at the entrance level to the building. And if you've got a split entry, you don't have to provide a barrier-free path of travel anywhere. So, in fact, in terms of barrier-free path of travel, those objectives and functional statements also would not apply in these buildings. So we've got to sort out this whole issue of where barrier-free does or doesn't apply in Part 9 before we start applying, attributing this objective and functional statement to any provisions in Part 9. And we suggest that this really needs to be dealt with at the policy level by the Commission. So we would support the change to allow volutes. We were now in single dwelling units and houses with secondary suites, so support the change to allow volutes, but we still have trouble with the criteria and the justification and the costing for other aspects of the proposed change. In terms of criteria, the proposed change says that you can have a newel post on the first riser, and maybe the code writers knew what they were talking about, and I suppose this photo shows a newel post on a riser, but it's not really clear to me what that means, given that a riser really is just the face of a component and doesn't have any thickness, and so how do you put the newel post on it? And the proposed change allows you to put the volute on the first tread, so why can't you put the newel post on the first tread? Justification, again, this question of consistency with the intent and the current requirement being consistent with the current intent to limit the probability of unexpected continuity, and again with the costing. If you can have a break in your handrail at a newel post, then you can have the newel post on the inside of a stair with a winder, and that's fairly straightforward. But if you're not allowing a newel post in the flight, then you either need a continuous handrail on the narrow side, which is complicated and costly to build, or you have to install on the outside, which makes the handrail longer, and that's going to cost a bit more. So none of that is recognized in the proposal. So we're suggesting that the exception for newel posts that changes in direction be put back into the requirements, and that in the provision that refers to newel posts and volutes, that provision be revised so that it refers in both cases to installation on the bottom tread. Design of guards not to facilitate climbing. This has been a real contentious issue for quite a while. The problem with the current requirements is that there's no justification for them, and they have a real adverse impact on design freedom and on the industry that manufactures guards. So the solution is to limit the application of the requirement and to remove the prescriptive criteria from the code. So the proposed change would apply the requirement only where the difference in height between floor levels is more than 1 story or more than 4.2 meters, the lesser of the two. And it would also update the appendix note accordingly and incorporate the information on the deemed to comply solutions that are currently in the body of the code into that appendix note. It's not perfect. As I said, there really are no, there's no information to justify any requirement at all, but people seem to be real nervous about taking the requirement out completely. But it's a definite step in the right direction, and so we'd suggest that it be supported, and we can work on it further in the future. Final proposed to change to Part 9 that we'll look at is venting of laundry drying equipment. At the moment, there are no requirements in Part 9, and there have been concerns about high humidity if the dryer is vented to the interior, and also particulates that are released into the air, and also fire hazards if the ducting isn't cleaned. So the proposal is to provide some requirements which would specify that discharge has to be to the outdoors. There has to be independence of the ducting. They have to be accessible for cleaning and corrosion resistance. And where there are multiple installations, then you'd need a common duct with a central exhaust fan and limp trap and make-up air according to 932. Not any real super serious problems with this, but it's not quite clear what is meant by accessible for inspection and cleaning. I'm concerned that somebody will look at this and say, well, you've got to be able to see the outside of the duct as well as the inside, and that's obviously impractical. And it's not necessarily clear what is being referred to in terms of smooth corrosion-resistant material. So the suggestion is that take inspection out of the proposed change. If the duct is accessible for cleaning, it's probably accessible enough inspection-wise. And that an appendix note might be useful to indicate what is acceptable dryer ducting, and to indicate that plastic ducting is still acceptable for connecting dryers to the galvanized metal. Combustible construction. Just really quickly, we just want to look at a couple of proposed changes here. This slide shows all of the subjects that are covered by the proposed changes in Part 3 to address this subject. The critical ones in terms of introducing higher combustible buildings are in 32250 for residential and 32257 for business and personal services. I want to just look at two, one on minimum perimeters and one on sprinklering. At the moment where a building is required to face a single street, there's no indication as to how much of the building has to face that street. So the proposal is to specify a minimum value, and that value is 25%. And I understand that CHBA is doing a little research to see whether or not this is unnecessarily stringent or whether it's acceptable. So if anybody's got any information on that issue, please pass it on to CHBA. The second proposed change has to do with sprinklering, and the issue that's being addressed is fires that might originate on balconies or decks, and the solution is to require sprinklering where the balcony or deck is greater than 610 millimeters deep. Concern here is that the application is too broad. If you're talking about a roof deck where the higher structures are only enclosures for elevator machinery or such, I'm not sure that you really need sprinklers, especially if the cladding is non-combustible. Similarly, if there are no overhanging structures, soffits or whatever, I'm not sure that this is necessary. Or if there are overhanging structures but they're a certain distance away from a sprinklered area, then it would seem that sprinklering would be a little bit excessive. So, Don wants to say a word.
Perhaps we can just stop there for a moment, let Adair take a sip of water. We've used about an hour of the hour and a half available. We have none or very few questions from the field. Now, we don't have to use this next half hour, but Adair is going to take a few more minutes to talk about submitting comments. I want you to listen to her, but also please think and start sending in questions, and after Adair is finished, we will deal with those comments received. So if you have comments or questions, we suggest you start using the chat function to send them in. Thank you. Okay, Adair.
Thanks, Don. So the final part of my presentation is how to submit comments. Get to the comment forms through the individual proposed change form. So if you find a proposed change that you want to comment on, you click on that proposed change, and up at the top is a link to the comment form. At the top of the form, you'll see a personal reference number. You might want to write that down. May or may not be useful. Following that on the form, standard stuff, name, coordinates, more coordinates, and then the code setter would like to know what sector of the industry you work in. And then you get to submit your comment. And as I mentioned, if you're going to comment, I suggest that you select from one of the middle three, so there actually is a comment, not just an I support or don't have an opinion. Next down, the reason. So you have to have a reason if you want the change modified or if you don't support the change. What I suggest for this is that you write out your reasons in Word or some other application. Gives you time to think about it. You're not hampered by this little tiny box on the screen, which will get bigger once you start entering your comment. But it's easier, obviously, to edit in another application, and then you can just copy them in. Under this heading, you'll see there's a little note that says that if you want to submit supporting documentation, please identify that those documents in this reason box, so they know that they need to track them down somewhere. The comment form allows you to attach a file electronically. That's very helpful and quite simple. You can also send in supporting documents by email, mail, or fax, and the coordinates are provided right there on the comment form. So once you've done all that, you can click the send button, and then right under that you could return to the records list and do it all again. And the public review period has been extended. Originally it closed on the 13th of December, and it's been extended now to the 23rd, so you've got a little bit more time to look at the proposed changes and submit your comments. So I'll hand things back to Don.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adair. And I hope that it's provided everyone with an idea of the key areas and the key areas where CHBA is likely to comment. We'd be very interested in knowing your comments if you're thinking of sending them in, or right now if you have any questions or concerns to raise that we can address in the room. As I mentioned before, in addition to Adair and Gary Sharp, we have Mihailo Mihailovic from the Canadian Code Center, and together we can maybe come up with a response to your concerns. So Gary, have we received a question?
Yeah, we've got the first question here, and I'll just read it. It's related to dryer ducting. What if the plastic connector ends up constituting most of the ducting? It would seem that the wire-reinforced plastic needs some limits. Adair?
Thanks, Gary. Good point, Peter. I think that warrants a comment from you through public review. Again, I don't know exactly to what extent the Standing Committee expected the ducting to be metal and how much they thought might be wire-reinforced plastic, so I think it's a good issue to raise for public comment.
Milo, did you want to say something to that? Or?
Well, I just want to clarify. Are they talking from the outside wall inwards?
Yeah.
Or are they talking from the inner wall? Because the whole purpose of this was to match Part 6. And when we say corrosion-resistant metal ducting, we're talking the ducting within the wall ceiling space, not the duct between the inside wall and the dryer. So I just want to clarify. The plastic connector, I don't know, is that from the outside vent trap or vent flap?
Okay, it wasn't even clear to me. It's Don here that that was the only concern in the change. So maybe some further clarity is required here.
So please submit a comment.
Okay, it looks like that's it from participants. I guess we'll do the wrap-up. Gary, did you want to mention the other event coming up for anyone interested? Or?
Well, for anybody that is interested, on December the 4th, that's next Wednesday, we will be having another webinar on 6-story wood frame buildings. And the presenter at that will be Ineke Van Zeelen from the Canadian Wood Council. And details on that will be sent out to everyone by Morella.
Okay then. Well, I'd like to thank Mihailo for coming over and being here to back us up, and Adair for her erudite presentation.
Sorry, Don, sorry to interrupt, but questions are starting to roll in now.
Okay.
I've got another question here. Was the connotation of topping considered in the sound transmission? Or in the sound submission, sorry.
Maybe it's Don, I'll talk briefly to that, and then Adair will talk. But there certainly was confusion. I should take a moment to thank the team in Alberta that did a dry run on the original wording here on the change to test it out, and they certainly found that some of the wording was hard to follow, and that there seemed to suggest that only if you had concrete topping, or topping which was interpreted as being concrete, would you have this ability to bypass the more complex conformance route? So part of what Adair has suggested is that the wording becomes clear and that topping is simply one of the options. Adair, did you want to speak a little further to that?
No, I think that's all correct. Maybe that's something that might be explained. Well, I guess once you get into the nitty-gritty, the table actually does, say that topping of a particular material. So I expect people get used to it, but certainly off the top, it's a bit confusing.
So, and we're hoping that the clarity on or and
yeah,
and we've had response from the Code Center to recognize that there's some need for additional clarity there, and further items. And there's a conference we're going to be speaking a little further with the Code Center about other elements of that change. Gary, is there anything else to raise?
Another question has come in. What about changes that seem to contradict one another, as for number 700 and 702?
Bruno, I don't know that they really contradict each other. They actually say about the same thing. It's just that for 700, the application is tapered treads in public stairs. So in that case, you do have the handrail to measure from, just because the code requires 2 handrails on public stairs that are curved. But again, if you're seeing something there that I'm not seeing, please send me a comment or submit a public comment to the Code Center.
Is there any intersection with the other point that's in terms of the defined or the natural path of travel that would result in not having a handrail on the outside? No contradiction there? Okay.
Right, Bruno. Yeah, it's not really a contradiction. It's just that there are different requirements for public stairs as compared to stairs serving single dwelling units and houses with secondary suites. The requirements for public stairs are much more stringent. Well, not much, they are more stringent. So you're not allowed to have stairs with mixed treads as public stairs. You're only allowed them in houses and dwelling units.
So any effort to make them the same might result in not allowing mixed treads in stairs, which is not the outcome we would look for. So, okay, but thank you, Bruno, for that. That's good to clarify. Okay, I think we're done. So, thank you, everyone, again. And just on a personal note, I'll say Gary Sharp will be taking over my responsibility shortly as I retire, and any further communication on this, perhaps, now when the chat function goes down, it can be emailed to Gary Sharp. That's Sharp, S-H-A-R-P, @chba.ca. And any comments received or notes received, we will try to post together with the presentation on the website and send instructions of how to find it after the meeting. So, anything else, anyone? Thank you again, Adair. Thank you all, and thank you for participating. End of webinar number 2. Thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone.